Hey there, I'm Tracy Spears. This week is very different. This podcast is not like any podcast I've done before. This one's emotional. This one is snagged from the headlines, and it's something that I feel passionately about the conversation for many, many reasons. So my two guests this week, one of them is Tracey Lyall, who is the CEO of Domestic Violence Intervention Services. My other guest for a little bit, I don't know how long she's going to stay on this call, but is Colleen McCarty, who is the executive director of Oklahoma Appleseed and an attorney. And you will understand why they're both on this call in a moment. Before I bring them into the conversation, I want to read to you a little bit of background about how the three of us are on this call right now. So this is straight from one of the news links that I am following, and it's very simply this. Give me just a minute to give you the tee up. Following a 2-day hearing, domestic violence survivor April Wilkens was denied a shortened sentence despite her lawyer's efforts to show that her crime was influenced by abuse. Wilkins is currently serving a life sentence for killing her rapist and abuser, Terry Carlton. Tulsa County District Judge Dave Guten's courtroom was filled with family, friends, longtime supporters of April Wilkins on Wednesday for the commencement of her resentencing hearing under the Oklahoma Survivors Act, which is what we're going to talk about today. The law, which took effect in 2024, allows judges to reduce a sentence if domestic violence was a contributing factor in the crime. Wilkins' case inspired the new law, and nearly a year ago, she became the first person to apply for relief under that. To date, one woman has had her sentence reduced due to the Survivors Act, and several other cases have been denied. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment because I know we can't talk about the case with Colleen on the call, so I don't want to do that. But I want to just, bring you both in and say thank you for being a guest on the podcast. So welcome, Tracey and Colleen. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So just with that little bit of a tee up, I mean, as I started following this felt like a Dateline or a 2020 or a 48 hours, and yet it happened here. So I'm not sure which one of you wants to start, but we're here because of this, the Survivors Act that, was passed in 2024. Tracey, maybe you should give us a little bit of a tee up as the CEO of Domestic Violence Intervention Service, which I will call DVIS from now on. So tell us a little bit about why we're all here.
Well, we are here. It's been a several-year process where Oklahoma Appleseed, that's the agency that Colleen is the executive director for, has advocated for the law to be changed and to bring to Oklahoma the Survivors Justice Act. As I understand it, Oklahoma is like the fourth state in the country to have this act in place to give domestic violence survivors relief of their sentence when they have committed a crime that is substantially related to the domestic violence that they've experienced. And so really the story that we're here about today is one of April Wilkins, and she's really like the reason that this law came to be in Oklahoma. And Colleen and her colleagues began drafting legislation. It took 2 legislative sessions for this law to get in place, but when it did pass, it passed with great support from our legislature who I believe they understood what domestic violence survivors are going through in our state, and they understood how critical it was to give this kind of relief for people who've been victimized by someone whom they've been in a relationship with, and in many cases, these survivors' lives have been impacted severely or derailed, is kind of the word. And particularly in April's case, she spent half of her life behind bars for a crime she committed after 2.5 years of pretty severe physical and sexual abuse.
And this happened 27 years ago, correct?
Yes.
So how long have you been with DVIS? Remind me, Tracey.
18 years in this role.
Okay, so when you come into this as the CEO of Divas, and you're a long-time nonprofit professional, obviously, this job, to be in this job for a long time, though, it's 18 years, you've seen a lot of things happen. And you've likely seen a lot of progress be made in how, in so many ways of how we're better supporting women and men and that have, been in a, domestic violence situation. So does this feel like in some way like, oh my gosh, like we haven't come as far as you wanted us to come? I mean, where do you want to go in this conversation? Because I know we're going to talk about April, but Colleen's got it. We got to let her go before we do. But for you, passing the Survivors Act, let's just talk about that for a moment. Huge, big celebration. What was the signal of that you felt like was going to be to the community, that we learned what?
No, I think it's, really the hope when the Survivors Justice Act was passed was that we're finally bringing the reality of domestic violence survivors to the forefront in Oklahoma, and that Oklahomans understood that domestic violence is a problem in our state, and it has been for decades. And so, the hope is that we've learned over these last decades with all of the training we've done for law enforcement and judges and prosecutors and other allied professionals that we have really sort of moved the ball in lots of ways in educating the public about the experience of domestic violence survivors and how difficult it is to leave a relationship and the dangers of the relationship and the impact of survivors and children survivors, and what it does to mental health and having productive, mentally healthy, strong people in our community. And so, really that hope was kind of all tied to the Survivors Justice Act, and that we were sort of putting it in the forefront, and that was, really becoming more and more understood in Tulsa, in Oklahoma.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, I do remember first being introduced to you, and I remember, being involved a bit in some of the trainings and, sitting in and listening and learning. And I think a lot of people that aren't educated go, well, just leave. Like, how hard is it? Just leave. Like, there's this reduction and, in beliefs about how, like, you're, I would just leave. We know so much more now about that, to your point, than what we knew then. And so it felt like with this act, and Colleen, I'm going to invite you in here with this act and the work that both of your organizations do, it felt like we had come a long way. Is that fair to say? So Colleen, jump in here and talk a little bit about Oklahoma Appleseed as well and how you interact with Divas.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. My name's Colleen McCarty. I'm an attorney and I'm the executive director of Oklahoma Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. We're a pretty new organization. We were founded in March of 2022, and we're part of the Appleseed Network, which is a network of justice centers across the country. I think there's 20 centers total now, one in Mexico City, so bi-national organization of lawyers and community organizers that really work to use the law for good, is the way we say it. We were founded by Harvard lawyers back in the early 1990s to really give back to the community what they had learned over their careers about public interest law. And so Oklahoma has really not had a public interest law presence. I mean, we have LASSO, Legal Aid Services, we have Still She Rises, and we have others that do direct services, but there's not a lot of legal centers that do the policy work and the direct service, as well as research and community organizing. So we do all four of those things. And our flagship project back in March of 2022, when we first started, was actually the case of April Wilkens. She had been in prison at that time for 25 years, and she had exhausted all of her appeals, exhausted all of her post-conviction relief options, and she really had no hope to be able to get free. And at that time, the best option for her was to tell her story. And so actually, my colleague Leslie Briggs and I released a podcast about her story called Panic Button that you can listen to on all the same platforms that this podcast is probably available on. And it really is a legal storytelling tool to help people understand what goes on with survivors of domestic violence when they get caught up in the criminal justice system. And it was used as a storytelling device to gather community advocates that cared about this issue and wanted to pass a Survivors Justice Act here in Oklahoma. There's one that's passed in New York that was very successful. It took them 10 years to do it, and it was also retroactive. And so we started out with the goal of passing one similar to the one in New York, but actually wanted it to be broader and stronger and retroactive so that it could help people like April. And through that process, April herself actually advocated to get a survey out into the prison and hear from how many other people are impacted by what we call criminalized survivorship. And we heard from over 150 women in Mabel Bassett Prison who self-identify as criminalized survivors. We backed all of those surveys with looking into their cases, getting their transcripts, and looking at the news coverage and understanding this issue a lot better. And so April was a huge advocate in getting us to better understand what these folks have endured and what the legal system has done in response to their victimization. And then, like Tracy said, it took the 2023 and 2024 sessions to pass the bill. And it is one of the strongest resentencing bills for survivors in the country, even now. And following our passage of it, Georgia passed theirs. And we have Texas, Connecticut, and several other states. I think Iowa as well is looking at doing it in inspiration from Oklahoma. And it's a really great thing to be able to say that we have done something that other states want to emulate instead of being at the bottom of every list possible and embarrassing ourselves nationally all the time with so much bad news. And so it really has been a bellwether for explaining domestic violence, explaining survivorship, and explaining the science behind interpersonal violence and how it has changed, how our understanding has changed. And it told us that the leadership in our state really is starting to hear that and believe that. And so it was a big deal. It really was.
So what makes ours stronger than New York's? I'm curious.
So in New York, it's a lot different there, of course. The politics and the courts are a lot different. And their bill says that they can only reduce the sentence if it is unduly harsh. We took that part out of our bill because Oklahoma has very draconian sentencing across the board. Almost all of our sentences for any type of violent crime faces a life or a life without parole sentence. And so the judges that hand those sentences down, they don't think that they're unduly harsh. So there would be almost no one getting relief from that. In New York, it's also what we call a may. So it's permissive. The judge can reduce it, but they don't have to. In Oklahoma, it is a shall. So once we prove our burden here with the evidence, they must reduce the sentence, and it is to a lower prescribed range. So they can't say, yeah, you proved it, I'm going to reduce it by 1 year. They have to reduce it pretty significantly, and it's prescribed how much lower they have to go. So like with April's sentence, she's serving a life sentence, and that has to go to 25 years or less. So since she's already served 27, she would walk free if we met our burden, which you'll hear in a little bit that we were denied at the sentencing hearing. We have filed a motion for reconsideration on that, and that is active right now. So we don't have a decision on that as of the moment of this recording.
I see. So when, and I don't know how much I can and can't ask, but I do want to ask you this. When you found out that there were 150 other women that were in that same boat, was that surprisingly high or surprisingly low? What was that?
It's funny because we have data that shows that 66% of women in Oklahoma prisons have experienced domestic and sexual violence within the year leading up to their controlling charge. So that's a lot of people. That's actually a lot more than 150. So I was kind of thinking it might be higher. But then when you think about whether or not people identify themselves that way or whether what we can prove in court, I kind of estimated around 150 to 200 was my bare estimate after seeing some of the results come in. And that's what ended up being how many we heard from. Now, that's just one facility. So we don't have any data from Eddie Warrior, which is the other women's facility. So there still could be more than that. But it doesn't surprise me at all when you consider the fact that we are number one for DV in the country as far as the incidence of DV, and we're number 3 for women being killed by men, in single partner, single offender homicides. So the numbers are there. And we also don't have the social safety nets to prevent people from going into the criminal justice system. Oftentimes, criminal justice system is our first response when it really should be our last response. And so it does not surprise me that numbers are that high.
Tracy's doing a big nod for those of you that aren't watching and are listening to that. So, Tracy, you want to comment on what she just said?
I think, just what Colleen said is just the prevalence and the statistics in Oklahoma. In my 18 years, we've been predominantly in the top 10. And so we don't seem to get out of this. And we're, most recently, as Colleen said, I think second in the country.
So both of you are saying this, and I guess there's a question coming, but it's there's probably still some reticence to be honest, to come forth to say what happened because of two things. One is, perceiving yourself as a victim, right? Like I know there's a lot of work being done to with victims so that they understand their role, what they did and didn't do. And then the other piece is probably afraid of something happening to them if they do come forth. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's the fear of losing children and the stigma of being a survivor of domestic violence and all of the things, and facing the harm doer's family and friends and their family and friends together. I mean, all of those things are prohibitive for someone to just come forward and say, "Yeah, I'm a victim of domestic violence and I've been abused for all this time." And so it's just it's a difficult role for a survivor to be in.
For sure. Colleen, what would you add to that?
I would just say, working on this issue for 3 years now, one thing that continues to shock me is the prevalence of family violence in Oklahoma. It is almost like the soup that we are all steeped in. When we look at the numbers of adverse childhood experiences for Oklahomans, we're also in the top level for that. I have heard from survivors that we work with that they didn't know that they were victims until they were sitting in the office at DHS and saw a poster explaining what domestic violence is. And if you're sitting in the office at DHS, things have already gone very wrong for you. Like, that's not the time that you want to be learning about what this means for you. And so many of them have been victims of violence from a very young age. They were introduced to drugs at a very young age. They were doing drugs with their parents. They were part of violence in friends, in dating, and in their families. And it's just sort of like a second language to them. And so when they realize that this isn't how they're supposed to be treated, it's almost like a very foreign concept to them. And so I think, that always shocks me. I come from a family that experienced domestic violence when I was a child. Both my mother and sister were victims of domestic violence. And so I recognize that. Like it wouldn't have occurred to me that this wasn't normal.
Is that what led you to this work?
I think I would answer that subconsciously. The answer is yes. I don't think that I knew when I came across April's case. Her niece and her niece's best friend had brought the case to me, and they were just these fierce advocates. And I told them I would look at it. I hear from people in prison all the time, Tracy, and a lot of times I kind of look at their file for long enough to be able to say, okay, what they've told me isn't true, so I'm going to put this one on the shelf. And when I continued to look and continued to look and continued to look and continued to read transcripts, and I couldn't find the thing that made it not true, that was when I got hooked to her case. But I did see a lot of my mom in April. I did see a lot of my sister in April, and in the way she tells the story about growing up in Kellyville. And so, being the child of a survivor, I think, has impacted my legal work pretty substantially in ways that maybe I didn't even realize until probably the last year or so.
It's hard to not have an emotional reaction to this if you haven't had that experience, let alone that you have. So I just, I started this, I met you for the first time today by saying thank you for all you're doing, and I'll continue that. And I can't thank, Tracey enough for our community as well. At this point, where are we with, are we, you have 150 women that have come forth. You have April's case. And can we talk a bit about where that case is exactly right now? I don't know which one of you can answer that question, but
Yeah, I can share the procedural posture and where we are and where we've been, everything that's in the public record now. So like we said, April was, the crime occurred in 1998, April 28th, 1998. And she went to trial a year later. So 1999 is when she was tried for first degree premeditated murder. She was fighting back against her abuser who had previously in the evening raped her. And there is documented evidence of that sexual assault. Her pants were ripped and she had gotten a SANE exam that revealed injuries from that assault. She grabbed his gun in the upstairs part of his house and hid it in a back pocket of her biking vest because she did not want him to use it on her. And he had previously threatened her with the gun in the evening. So she checked the chamber to see if it was loaded because she wanted to know, is he serious? Was he really going to kill me? She wanted to know how much danger she was in, which I think survivors can relate to that. Is he just joking around with me, or is this for real? And so when she goes back downstairs, she's continuously trying to get him to go to sleep. Please just go to bed, because she wanted to leave the house. She wanted to get out, but she knows that if she leaves, he can chase her out. And he has pulled her back inside by her hair before. That has been observed by neighbors. And so everything that you hear from her can be independently validated by people who have seen it or by a document, almost every single thing. And she goes back downstairs. There's a lot of drugs involved, and he's telling her to clean the needles. He was a habitual heroin user. Black tar heroin is what he was using, and methamphetamine, bad combination. And he tested positive for those posthumously. And he realizes at one point that the gun is missing. And so he runs back down the stairs and starts patting her down. And then he handcuffs her in the front and tells her that I'm going to RAPE you and I'm going to kill you and then I'm going to kill myself. And that's what he would say all the time. He would call it a double suicide. And so he starts pulling her towards the couch in his basement, and she knows as soon as they get over there, he's going to get behind her and see the firearm, and she only has a limited amount of time to make the decision that she's going to make. So she actually twists around with her handcuffed hands and pulls a modified Weaver position. She was trained in firearms. He actually took her to the firearms range to train her in firearms. And he turns around and sees her with the gun, and he is enraged at her and lunges at her, and she fires until there's no bullets left in the gun. That's what her dad always taught her to do. She's a girl from Kellyville. She was trained from a young age. If someone's coming to threaten you, you empty the clip. As most Oklahoma girls are taught that. Right. That's what my dad taught me. And she actually stayed at the house. She put a blanket over his body. She was able to use hand sanitizer to squeeze out of the handcuffs. And she waits with him for a while and holds his hand, and she's just beside herself with grief about what has happened. She doesn't want this to have happened. A friend calls the house, and she answers the phone and tells the friend, and she's clearly in shock. She tells the friend, I shot Terry. He's dead. And the friend is like, what? Are you kidding? The friend is the one that actually ends up calling the police, but she waits there at the house. They show up, and she tells them everything before they read her Miranda rights. She just tells them everything, and she goes to the police station. She's asking for a SANE exam. They will not give her a SANE exam until after she has given her statement. Then they do take her for the SANE exam, like I said, and then she goes to get booked into jail, and she tells the officer, well, I hope I don't have to stay overnight, because she so clearly, honestly, in that moment believed that she had defended her own life and there would be no reason for her to be prosecuted or held in the jail. that's how sure she was that she did the right thing. And so, sorry to go on a diatribe about the facts, but I think it's really important when we're talking about what's happened with the case. So within 24 hours, District Attorney Tim Harris filed premeditated first-degree murder charges on her. And within 1 year, she was facing a jury and went to a jury trial. It was actually a very long jury trial. Her defense attorney put on what we call battered women syndrome back then, and now it's battered person syndrome, which is a subset of PTSD. And it is a recognized legal defense as part of self-defense, that you can actually bring in all of the evidence of the abuse when you're putting on your case. And so they did do some of the evidence of the abuse, not all of it made it in, including a tape of him admitting to raping her when they were traveling in Amsterdam and several other things. So the jury didn't hear all of the evidence. They did hear a lot of evidence. And they did deliberate almost all night. From what I've heard, I've talked to some jurors in the case, they did immediately pretty much decide that she was guilty. There was no real deliberation about self-defense or whether or not she was in the right as far as that. They pretty much just decided she's guilty. And the longest part of the deliberation was spent on, was it life or life without parole that she was going to get? And there were a couple of holdouts on the jury. They ended up settling on a life sentence, which means you do get the opportunity of parole back then it was within 1/3 of your sentence. So she became parole eligible in about, I think, 2011. She did appeal the verdict. She lost the direct appeal. She has done 3 post-conviction applications, lost all of those. And so she's been through the ringer legally for sure. And when we started the podcast, there was really no prayer of any type of legal relief coming her way. Like, to even get her case back into court is kind of like a legal miracle. And then when we passed the Survivors Act, like, we knew that because her case had been so moving to so many of the legislators that wanted to vote yes on the bill, that we wanted to file for her case first. And so on the day that the bill became active, August 29th, 2024, we filed her application, which is over 400 pages of this evidence of the abuse that she experienced and why that was substantially related to the crime. And so then it took a year for us to get a hearing, and her hearing for Survivors Act relief was on September 3rd and 4th of this last month from the date of us recording. And we put on a federal judge, Claire Egan, who testified about being April's lawyer in 1996 and seeing the bruises on her from the abuse, and seeing her be very frightened when she was trying to pursue a protective order against Mr. Carlton. We brought up a man who worked at the dealership at the time that actually was asked by Terry to introduce him and April, and essentially had his employee asked her out for him while Terry took her present boyfriend away. So he had this whole plan to kind of trap her into saying yes to a date with him. And unfortunately, she did say yes. And then he witnessed some verbal abuse earlier on in the relationship. And then we stood on the trial transcript as far as all the other evidence of abuse, because April testified at trial for 3 days about everything that she experienced. And then we brought an expert from Oklahoma City named Angela Beatty, who is like one of the most recognized experts in domestic violence and coercive control in the state. And she testified on April's behalf that she did believe that the abuse was substantially related to the crime. The state district attorney, or the Tulsa County District Attorney, Steve Kunzweiler, called his own expert, a man named Dr. Jared Steffen, who he paid over $12,000 to, was what he testified to. And that man found, after a psychological evaluation, that the abuse was not substantially related to the crime, and that's what he testified. They also called an officer who responded to some of the calls for help back then. His name's Aaron Tallman. They called him to the stand. His testimony didn't last very long. And then we attempted to call our expert psychiatrist that we had retained on rebuttal, and that was ruled by the court that she could only testify to very limited of what she was prepared to testify to. And so she was only on the stand for maybe 5 minutes. And then that same day, he actually ruled from the bench that she was not eligible for a sentence reduction, that we did not meet our burden of clear and convincing evidence because he was giving Angela Beatty zero weight in her testimony of causation. And so it was a blow. It was a huge blow to me personally and our entire team here at Oklahoma Appleseed, as well as to the domestic violence survivor community, who it is hard because a lot of these cases don't have a lot of evidence. And when you have as much evidence as this and we're told that it still doesn't count, it does not look good for the rest of the cases going forward when this one is going to be denied based on not meeting the burden of evidence. So we did, about a week after that, file a motion to reconsider the determination that she wasn't eligible. And that is what's pending before Judge Gooten now. The district attorney has asked for an extension of time to prepare a written response, and they are working on that now. That was a lot. That was a lot.
No, thank you. That was as succinct as it could be. And I kept thinking I'm going to ask you these questions all along the way. And yet none of the answers are going to be satisfying.
You can ask.
Well, I mean, 400 pages, first of all. That Miss Beatty is deemed to not be credible when she's a known expert. Like there are just so many things that don't line up. I'm going to be careful in my questioning with you as you asked me to. Did you go into this with not a slam dunk? No attorney ever says something is a slam dunk. But did you go into this with an enormous amount of confidence that this was going to be the first of many that, we were going to right sides justice? Is that what you went in thinking? Or did you know it's still who knows?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you, Tracy. I put everything I know how to put into this case. I drained myself completely dry on how much I worked on it. So I don't think I thought it was a slam dunk, but I don't think I thought that denial was really on the table either. But that's also part of like your case when you're building it. You just have to believe it. You just have to believe it 100% when you're going in there. And so I was very surprised. Yes, I was very surprised by the outcome. April was very surprised by the outcome. She's now back at DOC. She's been transported back. Her room had been given away. Her things had been given away. I mean, it was an expectation from her, and it's hard you tell your clients, like, I can't guarantee you anything. I cannot guarantee anything. Courts are a wild card. You always tell them that, but it's just no one ever really believes you. They always think, oh, she just has to tell me that because she's my lawyer. And they have this hope. Hope is infectious. And there's this little group of them that we represent there at Mabel Bassett that they all know when each other's cases are coming up and they all support each other. And they all told her, this is the last time we're going to see you until you come in to visit us. And it's very difficult to express the level of shock, surprise, upset, and that's not even me. That's not my life.
Right.
That was, and she was already planning where they were going to go to eat that night with her family, and just the little things that you don't think about that after 27 years in prison, you just don't even let yourself think about. Yeah.
I can't even imagine physically when you heard that, what happened to you physically? What was your physical reaction?
Well, gosh, I think I was numb at first, and then I just kind of broke down. You never want to break down in front of your clients, but when you have a client for as long as I've had April, it's like we're a little bit more than attorney and client. And she saw it. It was probably, it's, a lawyer code of ethics, like you don't want your client to see you breaking down, but she did. And we both did. We held each other for a while there in the courtroom before she had to go back. And, I just told her, we're going to keep fighting for you as much as we can.
So Tracy, I'll bring you in. Were you in the courtroom when the decision was made?
I was not in the courtroom when the decision was made. I attended about probably 90% of the 2 days, and I was not there at the very end.
when you, you assumed, just like Colleen did, that, we were going to be celebrating. So when you heard, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I actually heard from one of my colleagues who was in the courtroom. So I heard, pretty quickly after the verdict was, or the decision was made. And so I think it's just disbelief. I mean, I wouldn't say anybody went in there with a slam dunk in mind, but if there was ever a case that justifies a relief in sentence, in my mind, and I haven't seen all that Colleen has seen, this was it. This was the case. This was the one where justice has not been served for April all throughout her entire experience with Terry Carlton. And then all the way up to 27 years later, where we're still not letting her see justice happen in her case. And so it was disheartening. It was, there was just moments of like disbelief, and again, how, and have we not come further than this in all of the things we've done over the last almost 3 decades? And so it, but I think it's certainly fueled us at Divas and me personally to just continue to fight for her. It's about April, but it's about all of the survivors who come after her. And there, as you know, there are hundreds behind her. Yeah. And so we have to see this one through. Yeah. This is our chance to get it right and to make it right.
Well, I mean, if I couldn't think of 2 more passionate, capable, incredible people that I would want on my team than you two. And the podcast that lays everything out, and I do hope people will go listen to that. I also, after hearing it and, hearing in the community, there's a lot of people that are paying attention to this right now. And all you have to do is read the facts as Colleen has laid those out and marry that with what we know is our experience as supporters of the good work that Divas does. I've been surprised, and I'm going to ask both if you have, at the outpouring of support that you are both receiving, saying, keep going, what can we do, how can we help? That doesn't release her today, but it's got to help in the long run. So have you all been surprised by the outpouring of support that you're getting, that April's getting?
Absolutely. I mean, the community, colleagues, friends, and, even Tracy, even you, and just, your quick willingness to have us on and talk about April's case. I mean, it keeps us going. It's more fuel for us to continue the advocacy and confirmation that we're headed in the right direction and that there are people behind us that are supporting the work. And it means a lot.
Well, I'll double click on what you just said. You sent me the podcast. And you were like, you should listen to this. And I started it and then, started traveling on it. And then you sent me a text probably September 4th or 5th. I mean, it was, and right after this happened. And I didn't watch the interview that you did on it until the next morning. And so the next morning I was getting ready. I was like, oh, I want to see, what did Tracy say? And I watched it. And you all are professionals and are not supposed to be emotional. I'm going to get emotional, but I watched it and I said it buckled my knees. And I don't know her. I know her story though, and I know you. And so I don't know. I was so emotional about it for all of us, mostly for April, but that this is still happening and the injustice that seems so obvious. What do you want to say to people now? I mean, is this the time where, we talk about what can people do to help April and also Oklahoma Appleseed and Divas? So I'll let you two have the floor to answer that.
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of things. There's particularly about April's case. There's a Facebook page called Free April Wilkens. And that not only will follow April's case, but many of the cases that are coming behind her. It kind of details what courts they're in, who the judges are of those cases that are coming after April's. So, liking that page and following there. There's also a petition that people can sign that is linked into the Free April Wilkins page. You can also send letters on April's behalf to info@okappleseed.org. And that will allow us to collect letters for her. There's also a Facebook page for the Oklahoma Survivor Justice Coalition. That's a coalition of a lot of people, sort of a multidisciplinary group of folks who meet regularly to talk about this act and in these cases and how we can support. So you can also follow along on that Facebook page. And there's just lots of information coming out. And so I think there's even a vigil happening this Saturday afternoon. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And her niece and supporters had asked to host a vigil at Divis's facility on this Saturday from 1 to 5, tomorrow, actually. And so, there's just lots of ways you can get involved and just kind of follow the case and support April and the survivors that are coming behind her.
Colleen, what can we do for Oklahoma Appleseed?
So we are the defense team for April herself, as well as about 15 others that are applying for relief under the Survivors Act currently. These cases are emotional, as you've heard, and difficult, and they also require an intense level of investigation and expert testimony for almost every single one, because we have to explain to the court why this type of abuse and this type of trauma is interrelated with the crime. And so it's difficult to do that if you don't have a licensed social worker or a psychiatrist or something similar to explain that. And so we try to get them volunteer, but it's hard to get people to do their expertise, volunteer. And so those do cost. So we do accept donations. We're a 501c3, and you can donate at okappleseed.org. There's a donate button up in the top right if you'd like to support the work that we're doing. We also work on education justice and election justice here in the state of Oklahoma. We currently have 4 lawsuits active against the State Department of Education, even though our friend, Mr. Ryan Walters, has exited the stage. Those lawsuits are still ongoing. And so we do a lot of great work at Appleseed. And so I'd ask, too, that anyone who is interested in those issues or civic justice or public interest law, you can follow us at OK Appleseed on Instagram, which is at OK_Appleseed, or on Facebook, which is facebook.com/OK Appleseed Center.
Well, so Emily, our editor extraordinaire, hopefully will capture all of that, or Valeska, and we'll put that in the show notes. Is there anything else to be said today in this conversation? I'll give you both a final word on that.
I think we're at another pivotal point where our criminal justice system can make things right for April Wilkins. We have a motion to reconsider in front of the court, and we have a district attorney and a judge that we have presented, or I guess April's defense team has presented all of the evidence that we can possibly present to someone to make a prudent, reasonable decision to relieve April's sentence and let her be with her family again. And I think, that is where it's important as Oklahomans that we pay attention to the positions that are elected in our city and so in our court system, in our district attorney's office. And so, I think the plug is really your vote matters, and it matters for people like April. And if you don't see the kind of outcome you hope to see, remember that when you go to the polls.
And I know Colleen can't comment on what I'm about to ask you, and you might say you don't want to comment on it either. But to the listener who's never heard of any of this, and they're listening to this right now for the first time, the question has to be, I mean, what are we missing? Like, this feels like a slam dunk, and like, why, how could this happen? I happen to know more of the story because as we just told Colleen a little bit, Tracy and I have tried to have this conversation before, but wanted to, change the narrative to talk just about the facts of the case. But there's another layer to this that, there might be influences on this decision. And I'm going to just say that and leave it there. Tracy, do you want to comment on that? Is Colleen going to be mad that I'm even asking that question? So
no, I think,
we're missing.
In April's case, it is a complex case, and most of these are.
Right.
In her case specifically, though, we're talking about some influence, local influence of money and power. And that has, I think, in my opinion, impacted April's case from the very beginning, and is still influencing her case. And I think, there's this thought that perhaps district attorneys don't have the full power to support relief in sentencing. And, I think that's one thing I want to say is that prosecutors have prosecutorial discretion every single day. And this is no exception. And they still have that same discretion on whether or not to pursue heavily or not so heavily in these cases when we're talking about relieving sentencing. And so it is important that we put people in office that use some discretion in these cases where egregious injustices have occurred, and where there's some money and power at play in decision making, and we still need to do the right thing, even though there's money and power at play.
That's right. That's right. Well said. You're both doing a beautiful job. I want to blow everything up and say all the things that I think, and I won't. But I will. Colleen, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, for my final word, I can't, like I've said this entire episode, I can't talk about things that could sway the outcome of the case. It's against my professional ethics, but I can talk about facts that have already been in the record and things that have already been established, and the things that I want people to know when you're asking, like, what are we missing? Before Terry Carlton, April had no mental illness. She had never been diagnosed with a mental illness, and she had never used drugs. She had been out a little bit wild as a teenager, maybe a couple of nights, but who in our society was not staying out all night and lying to their parents about where they were staying? So that's really all that she has in the record as far as like any type of drug use from before Terry. And then during the relationship with him, he did encourage her to begin IV drug use with methamphetamine. She was not forced to use that every single time, but during the heavily traumatic times, he was forcing her to use those drugs. And that did lead her to become addicted to methamphetamine, and that's heavily noted in the record, and she doesn't deny that. There were also issues of mental illness in the case. She, when some people use methamphetamine, they get what's called meth-induced psychosis, and they can start hallucinating or seeing things or saying things that don't make sense all the time. And also PTSD can do that to a person. And so back in 1998, we did not have a good understanding of trauma, and we did not have a good understanding of how trauma can impact someone's mental health status. And she was, in my personal opinion, misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder and other things throughout the process. Terry Carlton made sure that she was put into mental health institutions. She was put into 2 different mental health institutions, one right before the ultimate crime. And so that has been the district attorney's argument from the beginning, is that this crime wasn't really about abuse. It was about addiction and mental illness. And I think it's really important to help people understand that the fields of addiction science and mental health have advanced dramatically in the last 27 years to understand that any type of interpersonal violence or domestic violence a person is experiencing can lead to PTSD, can lead to mental health symptoms, and that many survivors do turn to drugs as a coping mechanism. And it's very difficult to separate the mental illness and the addiction from the abuse. And so to stand in a courtroom and say that those things are separate, that abuse is separate from addiction and is separate from mental illness, demonstrates a lack of understanding about the survivor experience. That's why Tracy says we haven't come very far in 27 years. That's the part that I think people need to understand is, yes, it's a complex case. April is not a perfect person. No survivor is a perfect person. There is no such thing as a perfect survivor. And the myth of the perfect victim is what's harmed a lot of these women, because they didn't act appropriately under the cultural gaze when they were escaping or trying to escape their abuse. And that's how they ended up in the criminal justice system. And the whole point of the Survivors Act is that we're supposed to be seeing things from a more nuanced perspective now, that we can understand these things better. And with April's case, I would say that is probably what people would say is the thing that, oh, that's what I'm missing. But in my eyes, that does not, someone being an addict or someone being mentally ill does not excuse or allow someone to abuse them. And we shouldn't diminish their experience as survivors because they have addiction and mental illness. In fact, we should still listen to them and believe them just the same.
Wow, so well said. I just want to say, I hope that those of you that are listening in will do a little bit of your own investigation, listen to the podcast. Remind me again the name of the podcast, Colleen, that you released.
It is called Panic Button, and it's the first season.
Okay, so follow that. Tracy, I love you. You know that. I just, the fact that you said it has made me more committed to this makes my heart feel good, because I can only imagine there is a part of you that's like, what am I doing all this for? And I'm sure you've had those moments in private, but I can't imagine our city without you and the work that you, the entire team does. So
Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, for both of you. It's, it's heartbreaking what you all see every day. I'm emotional hearing it on the periphery. I do know enough to know all the good work that's being done, but boy, it makes me mad. So, and it's heartbreaking. So I'm just going to ask my listeners, most of them are not from Tulsa, Oklahoma, but I hope you have stayed to the end. I hope you will consider supporting these 2 organizations along with the organizations in your respective communities. And we're just cheering you both on. We're cheering your organizations on, and we're cheering April on. And so I hope to have you both back when we're talking about justice being served. So thank you so much for your time today.